So I had a dream that I was at work and it was in a dark warehouse. The warehouse wasn't lit up like it usually is. It's usually really well lit with those really bright tube lights. I don't really know what to call them. I think they're halogens, but it's almost a headache how bright these lights are and how bright lights are in general in these commercial buildings. But, anyways, in this dream, it was super dark, couldn't see anything, and I was in the warehouse with one employee. And this particular dude, he always asks me for my pen or flashlight because he never has these things. So, in the dream, of course, I had to lend him my pen and flashlight, and he went off into two rows of big old automobile tires, just disappeared among them. And as soon as he disappeared, the light from my flashlight went away because he was using it, and it just got really dark again. And I realized that the warehouse is not supposed to be this dark, and this is kind of creepy. So I started to call out for him, but he didn't come back, and I eventually decided to create a helmet light, so I went somewhat lucid. So I started to create this helmet light, just a normal looking helmet, and I created all these lights around it that illuminated in every which way, and I started to slowly increase the intensity of these lights, and they became so bright that it started to burn my brain. And I eventually died. And then I woke up in a hospital, so maybe I didn't die. And I got up out of this hospital bed that I was in. It took me a while because I was a bit ill, it seems. And I was in one of those hospital rooms where there's two beds, but there wasn't anybody else in the other bed. And I got up, I looked around, and the hospital room looked pretty normal, other than a crawl space going between my room and the room next to mine. And I looked through the crawl space, there's nobody in the adjacent room, and it had a grating that was dismantled, like it was a large vent, basically. I'm not sure what it was there for. It's kind of weird. And I decided not to crawl through it. I just looked through it and went over to the washroom. The washroom looked pretty normal as well. And I looked into the mirror and everything looked the same. So a lot of people, when they look into a mirror in their dreams, it distorts their face and whatnot. And it might glitch out their perception, might like push them into a different scenario. They move into the mirror or whatever. And I think that last one happens with astral projection as well. So I rarely experience mirror distortions. So I don't know if I can use that as a factor to distinguish dreams from astral projection in any which way. So I just assume that it's just a personal thing that happens. I usually just see myself in a very defined way. So I looked at myself, and I had a red tint on my beard and my head hair, much more tinted than it is now. And I had greenish eyes, much more green than they are now. They were similar color, but they were more green and a bit more radiant in the dream. And my teeth were a bit more messed up. And my top left tooth was really mangled. Instead of it being like a sharp snaggle tooth, it was more like open-ended. It looked like it was really mangled. And I was wearing a hospital gown, and I just walked out into the hallway. There still wasn't anybody around. And to my right there was a lunchroom or a lobby. And there was 4 to 5 nurses in this lobby, and most of them were female. And I tried to talk to them, I tried to greet them, and then ask them what was going on, what was wrong with me, but I couldn't speak more than 2 words without losing my breath. Sometimes I could speak more than that, speak a full sentence, and I'd be okay, but for the most part, I couldn't speak too well, and it was extremely frustrating because I like to speak clearly and eloquently, but in this experience, it was just like I couldn't speak at all, and I was like losing consciousness whenever I tried to speak too much because I wasn't getting enough oxygen. It was like I had severe asthma or something. And one of the nurses took me back to my room, and she had to help me clean myself because I couldn't really move around too much. And it was weird because I was perfectly comfortable with, stripping down in front of this person and needing assistance to clean myself. And I was in a very odd relationship with this nurse as well. And another thing is that throughout the entire experience, I would get very upset and just lose my cool because I wasn't able to speak properly and I wasn't able to do things myself on my own. And I really was like, super emotional, which is not me at all. I'm a very content person. I rarely get angry. The only time I get angry is when I fall asleep at inappropriate times when I want to stay awake, which is most of the time. And when people mess with me when I'm asleep, because it's a very disturbing it's a disturbing disorder or array of disorders that I have that causes me to fall asleep every 3 to 4 hours, and people take advantage of it, and I can't schedule things. I don't go in public too much because of it, and it's extremely upsetting to me sometimes. But that's about it. Other than that, I usually can keep my cool. And when you're in a hospital and there's old people that are hassling the nurses, giving them a hard time, and they're all emotional and all that, and you're probably like, oh, I'll never be like that when I'm older. Well, that was me in this dream. Just an emotional old person hassling the nurses, except I wasn't really old. I was either the exact same age or slightly older. In this experience, I was just ill, and that's why I couldn't move around too much. I don't know really exactly what I had, but I couldn't breathe right. I couldn't move around very well. I had poor physical dexterity, and my muscles were all messed up. And after this experience, I've come to realize that I understand why people are like this when they're older, when they can't do things on their own and they can't control their physical body. People get angry and upset about things that they're unable to control, especially if it's their own physical body, because I do it to an extent. But in this particular experience, it's like everything I do requires assistance, and it was much more upsetting than what I have now. So I asked my nurse's name because I always ask names and locations and stuff. I always look at signs and landmarks because I trained myself to look for physical validation in any sort of altered state of being. So I asked her for her name, and she said that she's a drunk adolescent and she doesn't want me to look her up at the time. And that kind of suggests that this is kind of like a futuristic experience, like I'm a bit in the future, which is kind of concerning because I don't want to be crippled in the future, in the near future. And this person, this nurse, knew exactly what I was capable of. In this experience, I was able to bring in other selves into this vessel and communicate with them empathetically. So I had information from other selves, like similar other selves that are like me with a similar body on a similar timeline, if that makes any sense. Because other selves could be like ETs or whatever, not really human. But in this case, they were pretty similar to what I am now. And she understood that there was an atypical self bound to my vessel in that experience. Not saying it's an actual other self, just in the dream it was. And she understood that I was from the past, and I was asking about her so I could look her up and see if she's a real person. Oh yeah, and this particular body had a multiple personality disorder. I would feel like different consciousnesses shift in and out of this vessel and take over, and it would significantly change my behavior. And that was a bit frustrating because I didn't really know how to handle that. And in this dream, it was all about other selves just having full access to this vessel. It like significantly increased my intelligence, intuitive abilities, but I didn't really have too much control over how I behaved on the third density, if that makes any sense, because of how all these other selves can just come in whenever they want or whenever they need to. Other selves can be referred to as a soul group or your I there, There's different names for it. It's usually called a soul group, possibly an oversoul, but the soul group versus oversoul, they may not be synonymous. I don't really know. But they're basically just entities that are highly connected to yourself, so connected that they are pretty much you. That's at least how I perceive it. So for the rest of the experience, there was talk about military personnel that were looking for me because I had a lot of intel on certain government operations, like lots of things that the government was doing that they shouldn't have been doing, and they wanted to recover this intel. Because I was in the hospital, I couldn't do anything other than all that intuitive stuff that I do. And at this point, it was very advanced, much more advanced than it is in reality right now. And I was getting all this information about them and jotting it down into a computer or whatever. And they were looking for that. And there was a militant that entered this lobby that I was in with the nurses, because I went back to the lobby with them. And he was looking for me in particular. I just kept my face away from him, and he didn't really recognize me, he didn't find me. And I put an iPad down on the counter to distract him, and he got distracted by the iPad, and he took that away. And when he was outside of the lobby, I took my 2 encrypted hard drives that just happened to be in around the same area, and I just put them in my pocket. And that's it for that experience. See you next time.